My name is Eliza Hart. When I was 10, my own father laughed in my face as I dropped a basket of strawberries in the blazing heat, calling me too soft for real work while my brothers cackled beside him. That moment, standing alone in a field of dust and shame, lit a fire in me, and one day, I'd make sure they regretted ever calling me weak. Before we dive into this story, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. And if you've ever had to prove your worth to the very people who doubted you most, this story might hit close to home. The air was thick with the kind of heat that settles deep into your bones. It was the kind of California summer that melted your skin before noon and turned the strawberry fields into a hot box of dust, sunburns, and biting flies. I was 10. My brothers, Kyle and Travis, 14 and 15, already towering over me, had been teasing me since sunrise. But that was nothing new. I bent down to pick another ripe berry, my hands already stained red and sticky. My basket was only half full, and it was my third time being left behind on the row while the boys bragged about how fast they'd finished. I wiped my forehead with the back of my wrist, feeling the grit of dirt smear across my temple. My arms ached, my knees throbbed from crouching, and every step I took made the blisters in my too small hand-me-down sneakers scream. Then I heard Kyle's voice, loud and taunting. "Hey, snail, you think you'll finish before the berries rot?" Travis let out a barking laugh. "Nah, she's probably sorting them by size like it's tea time." I turned to face them, standing tall, proud with their full baskets, their shirts stained in sweat and triumph. Behind them, Dad leaned against the truck, arms crossed, watching. I hoped for some hint of protection from him. Maybe he'd tell them to stop. Maybe he'd say I was trying my best. Instead, he shook his head, almost smirking. "She'll never be strong enough for real work," he said loud enough for all the nearby pickers to hear. "Best we can hope is she learns to cook." The laughter exploded around me like firecrackers. Farm hands, neighbors, cousins, they all chuckled or looked away awkwardly, unsure whether to pity me or join in. My stomach twisted. My cheeks burned hot with something deeper than sunburn. Shame. I dropped the basket, not by accident, not from clumsiness. I let it fall. The berries scattered over the dry ground like my last bit of pride had burst open, bleeding out. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there looking at the mess, fists clenched at my sides. And then came the final twist of the knife. Mom, standing near the tailgate, turned away. She didn't defend me. She didn't meet my eyes. Just looked at the horizon like if she pretended hard enough none of this was happening. That was the moment. That exact second, barefoot in the dust, with flies circling the ruined berries at my feet, I felt something settle in me. A tight knot. A silent promise. They'd see. One day they would all see. That's the memory that shaped me more than any birthday or school award ever could. That was the day I learned that in my family, your worth had to be proved in blood, sweat, and silence. They didn't believe in soft hands or bright ideas, only calloused palms and hard labor. And if you were born a girl like me, they assumed your place was either in the kitchen or out of the way. Can you imagine being mocked by your own father for being born the wrong kind of strong? Stick with me. This is just the beginning. They say that time heals, but in my house, time just reinforced roles. After that summer in the field, I didn't return to pick strawberries with Kyle and Travis. My father said it was because I wasn't cut out for the land. But I knew the truth. He thought I wasn't worth the trouble. And my mother, she never argued. She just kept scrubbing dishes or folding laundry with her eyes cast down, like silence was her armor. So I stayed inside. While my brothers became little kings of the farmland, I tried to carve out some kind of worth in the shadows of our creaky farmhouse. I learned to cook, really cook. Not just scrambled eggs and boxed macaroni, but roast chicken with lemon and thyme. Sourdough bread from a starter I nursed like a pet. Pies with crusts so flaky they crumbled at a touch. I reorganized the tools shed by size, type, and frequency of use, something none of the real workers had bothered with in years. I fixed broken hinges, restacked hay bales in the barn after a storm knocked them over, and once even repaired a busted belt on the old washing machine using nothing but a bent hairpin and duct tape. But no matter how much I did, I was invisible. "Dinner's pretty good, Ma," Kyle would say, wiping his mouth with his arm, never bothering to look at me, the one who had spent all day preparing it. Travis, mouth full, would grunt, "Better than last week's. Guess Mom finally got the hang of that new recipe." Mom didn't correct them. She never did. And Dad, he'd finish eating, push back his chair, and announce, "Back to the real work," before heading out again. Every compliment landed on someone else. Every achievement passed over me like wind over glass. It wasn't just meals or chores. When my brothers got new boots or gloves for work, I got hand-me-downs from neighbors. When they broke something, it was boys being boys. When I spilled flour trying to bake my first loaf of bread, Dad sighed so loudly it echoed, then muttered, "Hopeless." At 13, I learned how to balance the family's checkbook, quietly in the evenings when no one was around. I noticed the late payments, the interest piling up on tractor repairs, the overdue notice for fertilizer shipments. I showed the ledger to my mother once, hoping she'd be impressed. She barely glanced at it. "That's your father's business," she said before folding the paper and stuffing it into a drawer. But I kept the books anyway, in secret, because it made sense to me in a way that the rest of life didn't. There were moments, tiny, flickering ones, when I thought maybe they'd notice. Like the time I sold 3 dozen of my pies at the farmer's market and came home with a small envelope of cash. Kyle opened it, looked at the bills, and said, "Don't get cocky. People just feel sorry for you." That night I cried in the barn. Not loudly, just enough for the dust to cling to my wet cheeks. But here's the thing they never understood about me. Every snub, every insult, every dismissal was fuel. Not firewood. I wasn't planning to explode. I was a slow, steady burn. I stopped trying to be seen, and I started watching instead. I paid attention when Dad borrowed money from Mr. Brigham and lied about the terms. I memorized the harvest cycles and when profits dipped. I noticed when the boys came home muddy but empty-handed, and when the equipment was used out of schedule. They thought I was just scrubbing pans and folding sheets. I was studying. One night when I was 15, I overheard Kyle bragging that he'd finally fixed the tiller by jamming a wrench into the starter motor. "Works like new," he said. 3 days later, the engine caught fire. Dad blamed the supplier. Kyle stayed quiet. No one asked me, though I had warned them the day before that the fuel line looked corroded. That's when I stopped trying to warn anyone. If they didn't want my voice, they wouldn't get it. But I wrote everything down. A blue notebook stashed beneath my mattress. Pages full of costs, accidents, patterns, and ideas. Like how crop rotation could prevent soil exhaustion. How a new supplier in Fresno had better seed pricing. I even did little projections, just for fun. What might happen if we planted more corn instead of strawberries, or leased out some land to a neighbor. By 16, I knew more about the financial side of our farm than anyone in the house, but I still served dinner with a smile. Still thanked my brothers when they told me to stick to the kitchen. Still bit my tongue when my father called me our little house helper. I wasn't just enduring anymore. I was preparing. Because deep down I knew someday they'd need me. And that day I wouldn't be the girl with berry-stained hands and no voice. I'd be the one holding the ledger. By 17, I had perfected the art of disappearing. Not physically, I was always around. I made meals, kept the pantry stocked, managed the mail, and even started helping a neighbor, Mrs. Applegate, organize her receipts for tax season. But emotionally, I had learned to make myself small, quiet, polite, unthreatening. But something was changing in me. Maybe it was the books I checked out at the town library after my chores, books on budgeting, investing, even real estate. Maybe it was the way I kept seeing the same mistakes repeat themselves on our farm while nobody wanted to fix them. Or maybe it was just that I was tired. Tired of being told what I couldn't do, what I wasn't built for. I knew I wanted something different. I just didn't know how to say it out loud. Until one Sunday evening. We were gathered around the long wooden table, the one with the permanent dent where Kyle once slammed a wrench into it during a tantrum. My father sat at the head, chewing through a pork chop like it owed him something. Mom passed around mashed potatoes with that same distant look in her eyes. Kyle and Travis were fresh from the fields, sunburned and smug, talking about new tractors they saw in a catalog. I'd spent the day deep cleaning the shed and fixing the busted gate. No one mentioned it. Halfway through dinner, I set my fork down. I want to study finance, I said. They kept eating. I tried again. I'm applying to the Waverly School in Sacramento. They have a strong agribusiness program. I want to help improve how farms like ours are managed. This time, Kyle snorted so hard milk came out of his nose. Travis nearly choked on a green bean. What, you gonna sit behind a desk counting beans all day? It's not about beans, I said, pulse pounding. It's about running things smarter. You waste money every harvest. I've been tracking it. Dad looked up slowly. He had that look, half disbelief, half disappointment. You, he said, voice thick. You think you're gonna run this farm from a city building. I think I can help. No, he cut in, voice louder now. You've been playing house, Liz. You don't know what it takes. School's fine for girls who want office jobs, but this is real work. He gestured around the table like the dinner he didn't cook was proof. I felt the flush of humiliation rise, but I didn't back down. I'm not asking for permission, I said carefully. Just support, maybe some help with the deposit or a letter of recommendation. Kyle leaned back, arms crossed. This is rich. You think you're too good for us now. Travis chimed in, grinning. Dad, she wants to go play banker. They laughed. It was that same old sound again, like boots grinding my hopes into the dust. And then something unusual happened. My mother spoke. Liz, she said gently, setting down her napkin. Why don't we talk about this after dinner? That was all she said. But the message was clear. Drop it. Don't start something. Not here. The sting was sharper than anything the boys had said. Because deep down, I think I'd hoped just once she'd stand up for me. Just once. Instead, I nodded and picked up my fork like the conversation had never happened. After dinner, I stood at the sink scrubbing plates, eyes stinging with unshed tears while the others headed outside. The warm scent of dish soap couldn't drown out the bitterness settling in my throat. I dried the last plate and stared out the kitchen window. The field stretched wide and gold beyond the fence, the soil tired from overplanting. I knew every inch of it. I had cataloged its inefficiencies like secrets. But it no longer felt like mine. That night in my room, I pulled out my notebook. At the top of a clean page, I wrote, I am leaving. Then I listed what I would need. Transcripts, financial aid paperwork, letters, a place to stay, a job, a plan. I gave myself 3 months. The silence at dinner that night hadn't shut me down. It had freed me. I left home with a duffel bag, a scholarship letter, and exactly $128.42. That morning, no one even looked up when I said goodbye. My father was tuning the tractor, Kyle and Travis were loading supplies into the truck, and Mom was stringing beans in silence like always. I stood by the door for a long second, waiting, hoping maybe for someone to stop me, to ask where I was going or why I had packed so much. But the only sound was the wind rattling the porch screen, so I walked. By sundown, I was in Sacramento. Waverly's School of Finance wasn't flashy. Didn't have ivy-covered buildings or marble staircases, but when I stepped onto campus, I felt something loosen in my chest. Like maybe, just maybe, there was a version of life that wasn't soaked in dust and mockery. My studio apartment was barely bigger than a storage unit, shared with a graphic design student named Nina. She had bright pink hair, about 5 pairs of combat boots, and a coffee addiction that rivaled her caffeine budget. I wasn't sure we'd get along at first, but Nina saw me. She listened when I talked about budgeting crop rotations and optimizing supply chains. She nodded with wide eyes when I explained cost projections like I was unraveling a mystery. One night, halfway through freshman year, I was trying to explain a cash flow model for our farm to her, just for fun. Halfway through, she stopped me. Wait, hold up. Did you just create a balance sheet based on how your dad tracks harvest yields? I blinked. Yeah. She laughed, but not in the cruel way I was used to. You're literally a financial savant. That's insane. I didn't know what to say, because no one had ever used the word savant about me. From then on, something shifted. I stopped feeling like an imposter. The lessons came alive for me, not just the theory, but the way they mirrored my life. Cash flow, debt load, ROI, all of it was familiar, even comforting. I knew the patterns because I'd lived them. Late night studying felt like meditation. I was chasing something bigger than grades. I was building an exit ramp out of shame. I worked weekends at a grocery store downtown to cover rent, ran numbers in the back room during breaks, and volunteered for tutoring shifts just to absorb how other people learned. I got to know professors, asked hard questions, challenged old case studies with what I'd seen back home. By the end of the year, I was on the dean's list. By the middle of sophomore year, I was tutoring upperclassmen. And all the while, I kept a postcard of the family farm pinned to the wall beside my desk. Not for comfort, for clarity. Every time I thought about quitting, about how tired I was, how lonely, it reminded me why I couldn't go back. Because the snail was no longer crawling. She was calculating. Late one evening, Nina flopped onto her bed with a half-eaten granola bar and said, "Hey, can I ask something personal?" "Sure." "Why finance?" I hesitated. No one had asked me that before. "Not really." "Because numbers don't lie," I said after a long pause. "People do, but numbers, they tell you what's broken and how to fix it." She was quiet for a second, then she nodded slowly. "Yeah, I feel that. Every story has a turning point. For me, it wasn't a big award or sudden success. It was that quiet realization I wasn't broken. My family's view of me was, and for the first time I started seeing myself not as a burden or a tag-along, but as the asset they never knew they had. You'd think the silence would hurt less over time, but it didn't. By the time I reached junior year, it had been almost 2 years since I left the farm, and the letters from home had dwindled to nothing but brief, awkward updates. Most of them weren't even directly from my parents, just random forwarded emails from my mother's church newsletter. An occasional group message with photos of Kyle and Travis standing beside some new equipment I hadn't even known they could afford. That was the first sign something was off. Kyle posing next to a brand new pickup truck. Travis smiling in front of a stainless steel combine that had no business being on a struggling family farm. In the corner of the photo, barely noticeable, was my father grinning like they'd won the lottery. No note, no caption, just the image. And not once, did any of them say thank you. Because while they were buying shiny toys, I was the one pulling 18-hour days at school and work, earning money and knowledge they never believed I could. Still, I told myself I didn't care. I told myself it didn't matter that they hadn't asked how I was, hadn't acknowledged my grades, or the internship I landed that summer with a boutique investment firm in downtown Sacramento. But one day, walking into the shared kitchen at the firm, I overheard one of the interns on a call. He was bragging about how his parents had thrown him a party for making the dean's list. I froze with my coffee halfway to my lips. A party. For grades. It hit me like a punch in the chest. I had worked harder than I'd ever thought possible. And the people who should have been proud didn't even ask how I was doing. A week later, I got a voicemail by accident. I was on the family group chat, though no one ever texted me directly anymore, and my phone buzzed with a new audio message. I almost didn't listen, but curiosity won. The voice was unmistakable. "Kyle." "Yeah, business is good," he said. "We're doing fine without her. Honestly, I think she wanted to leave. She was never cut out for real work anyway." Then my father chimed in, muffled but clear enough. "That girl was always more trouble than she was worth. Let her play banker in the city." I didn't cry, I didn't even feel angry. What I felt was clarity. They didn't forget me. They chose to erase me. That night I stayed in the office late, long after the other interns had gone home. I sat alone in the glow of my dual monitors, poring over spreadsheets and agri-investment profiles, running models for farms much like ours, but run well. Farms that were sustainable, profitable, evolving. And in every cell, every formula, every column I filled, I could see the holes in how we had done it back home. I could see how they were surviving off luck, not planning. And I knew it was only a matter of time. They wouldn't ask for help, not until it was too late. But when that day came, I'd be ready. Back at my apartment, I pinned a new piece of paper beside the postcard of the farm. It was a printed screenshot of the voicemail transcript. Just the line, "Let her play banker in the city." Nina raised an eyebrow when she saw it. "That motivation fuel." "No," I said with a half smile. "That's the receipt." By the time senior year started, I wasn't chasing recognition anymore. Not theirs. Instead, I focused on numbers, their calm, stubborn honesty. I had landed a position on the agribusiness team at my internship firm, Luminvest Capital, one of those boutique investment firms where everyone drank bitter coffee and wore clothes that didn't wrinkle. They liked me. I liked the work. It was quiet, exact, unsentimental, and I was good at it. I knew the rhythms of land better than anyone in the room because I hadn't just studied it, I had lived it. My manager, Allison Royce, took notice quickly. "Eliza," she said one afternoon after a client meeting, "where'd you learn to analyze risk like that?" I shrugged. "Managing dinner for 6 on a budget that never balanced." She laughed, but I wasn't joking. My days at Luminvest were filled with portfolios, profit forecasts, investment decks. At night, I studied for exams and answered emails from younger students asking for help. I started mentoring a couple of freshmen who reminded me too much of my younger self. Quiet, overlooked, but sharp. And on the wall of my apartment, beneath the farm postcard and that voicemail quote, I added a third item, my offer letter. Head of Agri-Finance Research, Luminvest Capital. It was official. I was graduating early. Not just with honors, but with a job that most people twice my age would kill for. Full-time, benefits, salary with a comma in it. I should have been ecstatic. But when I walked across that graduation stage and heard my name announced, the only people cheering were strangers, professors, my classmates. No family in sight. I spotted Nina in the crowd, waving like a maniac, filming with her phone. I smiled. Genuinely, but there was a hollowness under it. I wasn't surprised they didn't come, but it still hurt. Later that evening, Nina and I sat in our favorite cafe, a small place with crooked art and perfectly burnt creme brulee. We toasted with lukewarm coffee and half-eaten pastries, our lives about to change in wildly different directions. "To freedom," she said, raising her mug. "To making it out," I replied. She reached across the table, her eyes suddenly serious. "Do you want to call them?" I shook my head slowly. If they wanted to be part of this moment, they would have shown up. "Still hurts, huh?" "Yeah," I admitted, "but not in the way it used to." Because here's the truth I had come to understand. There's a difference between missing someone and missing the idea of them. And I was done chasing the idea. Back in my apartment that night, I stood at my window, looking out at Sacramento glowing gold in the late spring dusk. I thought about the girl who used to wipe berry juice off her hands and pretend not to hear her brother's laughter. She was still inside me, but she'd grown teeth. And now, she had a business card. I came home late from the office that night, heels in hand, hair undone, and exhaustion tucked into every corner of my body. We'd just closed a major deal, something involving almond growers in Central Valley, and I was riding the kind of adrenaline crash that only comes after weeks of pressure and silence. Sacramento was cooler than usual for September, the air damp with the kind of fog that makes everything look soft around the edges. My apartment building was quiet, save for the occasional creak of pipes or humming light fixtures. I reached for my key without thinking, the way you do when the door and your hand already know each other. That's when I saw him, sitting on the stoop, shoulders hunched, ball cap pulled low over his eyes, hands clenched together like he'd been working up the nerve to knock, and failed. "My father," I froze, still half a step from the door, heart thudding like it remembered everything before my brain could catch up. He looked older, not in the natural way people age, in the way people shrink under the weight of something they can't fix. "Liz," he said quietly, standing, I wasn't sure you'd be home." I didn't say anything. He glanced around, rubbing the back of his neck. "Didn't want to call, figured you wouldn't pick up." He was right. Still, I said nothing. "I know I shouldn't be here," he added quickly, "but I didn't know where else to go." That stopped me, not because I believed it, because I already knew where this was going. He looked up finally, eyes red-rimmed and damp. And in that moment, I didn't see the man who'd once called me a burden or laughed when I dropped strawberries in the dirt. I saw someone who had lost control of the story he'd written about himself. "It's the farm," he said, voice cracking. "We're in trouble." Of course. I didn't move, just let the words sink in like stones into a still pond. "Kyle and Travis, they made some bad calls," he went on, eyes darting everywhere but me. "Borrowed against the property, took out some high-risk equipment loans. Some investment deal went sideways, something about a grain co-op." I waited. He kept talking. "We're 2 weeks from foreclosure, maybe less. I've tried everything." A pause, then the line I'd been waiting for. "We need you, Liz." It should have felt satisfying. It didn't. It felt like someone handing me the wreckage of a ship I wasn't allowed to board when it was still afloat. "You need my brain now that your sons have failed," I said softly. He flinched, but he didn't deny it. "They didn't listen," he said helplessly. "But you were always good with this kind of thing. You always kept track, always thinking. I didn't see it then, but I see it now. Too late, too easy." And yet my stomach twisted. Because I had spent years dreaming of this moment when they'd finally recognize my worth. But I never imagined it would come like this. Not as an apology, as a plea. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have believed in you, I should have seen you." And for a second, a small, shameful second, I almost opened the door, almost. Instead, I stepped aside. "You need to leave," I said. "I can't talk to you like this. Liz, if you want help, put it in writing. Email me. No more doorstep visits. No more guilt. No more pretending this isn't what it is." He looked stunned, but I wasn't finished. "And if you're thinking of playing the family card," I added, "remember you already folded it years ago." His mouth opened, then closed. He nodded finally. Okay, I'll go." He turned and walked down the stairs, the sound of his boots scraping against concrete. I stood there for a long time after he disappeared into the fog, not crying, not shaking, just breathing. Because the little girl who once stood in a field full of crushed strawberries had waited her whole life to be seen. But she didn't need their eyes anymore. She had her own. I didn't sleep that night. Even after my father's shadow disappeared into the fog, my body stayed wired, like the moment had embedded itself beneath my skin. I sat at the kitchen counter, staring at my laptop, the screen reflecting my face in ghost-like silver, debating what to do. Emotionally, I wanted to slam the door on the whole thing. Let them lose the farm. Let them taste the ruin they once swore I'd never understand. But professionally, that was a different story. The numbers intrigued me. I pulled up the public property records, then cross-referenced loan filings, liens, and crop yields from the last 3 years. Kyle and Travis hadn't just been reckless, they'd been arrogant. Over-leveraged land, questionable supplier contracts, and a grain co-op investment that had no formal risk insurance. It was a slow-motion collapse, preventable, obvious to anyone who knew what to look for, and I did. But this wasn't about proving I was right anymore. This was about opportunity. I took a deep breath and opened a new file, titled it Farm Acquisition Proposal Draft. By the time the sun rose, I had written a clean 8-page pitch. The gist was simple. Luminvest could buy the Hart family farm as a distressed asset. With restructuring and investment in modern agri-tech, it could turn profitable within 24 months. I broke down projected costs, cash inflow potential, tax incentives for land preservation, and strategic brand angles for sustainable sourcing. To anyone else, it was just another rural investment. To me, it was the land where I'd been humiliated into silence. The fields that stole my summers and stained my hands and taught me to work twice as hard for half the credit. Now I was asking my firm to acquire it, not to save my family, to save the asset. The next day, I sat across from Allison Royce, my mentor at Luminvest and the only person at the firm who knew even a fraction of my backstory. She flipped through the proposal, nodding occasionally, her mouth pressed in that thoughtful line she made when something impressed her. "This is sharp," she said finally. "Very sharp. How long did it take you?" "Overnight." Her brow lifted slightly, but she didn't say anything for a few beats. "And your connection to this farm, I grew up on it. You're the daughter of the current owners." "Yes," she sat back. "And you're okay bringing this to the board?" I met her gaze. "This isn't personal, Allison, it's profitable." She didn't smile, but she nodded. "Let's schedule you for Thursday's pitch session," she said. "Be ready for tough questions. If they catch even a whiff of sentimentality, you'll lose the room." I smiled faintly. "They won't." Thursday arrived with the kind of eerie calm that makes your pulse louder than your thoughts. I wore a charcoal gray pantsuit, minimal makeup, and heels that clicked confidently on the conference room floor. The boardroom was filled with familiar faces, executives, analysts, a few investors who'd flown in for quarterly updates. I had 10 minutes to present. I stood at the head of the table and launched into the numbers. No emotion, no nostalgia, No mention of my last name, just risk, return, projections, and margin. When I clicked to the final slide showing net profit over 5 years, I could feel the weight in the room shift. A few heads nodded. Someone murmured, "Impressive." Then came the questions. How do you plan to address the existing debt? Will the current staff stay on? What infrastructure upgrades are prioritized in year 1? I answered each one without blinking, because I had already lived the inefficiencies they were just now discovering. At the end of the session, Allison leaned forward. "And who's leading the operational transition?" I didn't hesitate. "I will." A pause. "Any conflict of interest we should be aware of?" I smiled. "Only that I know every square inch of that land and exactly how it's failed under emotional management." Silence. Then a low murmur of approval. "Fair enough," said Allison. "We'll vote internally, but I'll tell you now, this is the strongest agri-asset pitch we've had this quarter." I walked out of the room with my spine tall and my heels silent. Not because I wanted revenge, because I was reclaiming something. Not just the land, my story. And for once, I wasn't asking anyone to believe in me. I was proving they should have. 2 weeks after the board approved the acquisition, the letter went out. It was official. Luminvest Capital had purchased a controlling interest in the Hart family farm. The terms were generous by market standards. Existing staff would be evaluated for continuity. Debts would be restructured through the firm's agricultural reinvestment program, and operations would fall under direct corporate oversight. No mention of me. No signature bearing my name. Just a return address in Sacramento and the seal of a firm they'd never heard of until now. I didn't need them to know. Not yet. But I wanted them to feel it. The first call came from Travis. He didn't call me, of course. He called the Luminvest office and left a message for whoever's in charge of this takeover mess. The receptionist, bless her patient heart, forwarded it straight to me with a note. "He sounds confused. Should I have legal respond?" I told her no. Let him stew. Next came a text from Kyle. Just a number I hadn't seen in years, flashing across my phone with 6 angry words. What the hell is going on? I didn't answer. Instead, I waited for what I knew would come next. Dad. It took him longer. Probably because it took longer for the weight to settle in. The loss of control. The realization that this wasn't a temporary financial partnership or a lifeline from some friendly neighbor. It was a takeover, and he wasn't holding the reins anymore. When the call finally came, I let it go to voicemail. His voice was flat, tired. "Liz, I know this has your fingerprints. I don't know what you've done, but if you're in this, please call me. We didn't know, we didn't understand. Didn't know, they knew who I was, they just didn't care until it cost them everything." I saved the voicemail but didn't reply, because I had one more move to make. The invitation went out the next day, hand-delivered envelopes. Thick paper. Gold foil embossed with the Luminvest logo. Each one addressed formally to Mr. and Mrs. Hart, Mr. Kyle Hart and Mr. Travis Hart. They were invited to a stakeholder transition meeting at the Luminvest Sacramento office, where the new operational lead would walk them through the updated business model, expected staff changes, and the long-term development plan. Mandatory attendance. Business attire. No plus ones. The morning of the meeting, I arrived early. The boardroom had been set up just the way I asked. Glass table, water pitchers, folders neatly stacked at every seat. A digital screen glowing with the header, Hart AGRI Acquisition Strategic Restructuring Plan. I wore a deep navy dress, simple, sharp. No jewelry. No makeup beyond what made me look alert. My badge said Eliza Hart, Director of Agri-Finance. At 9:58 a.m. they arrived. All of them. Dad in a jacket I hadn't seen since Kyle's high school graduation. Kyle sullen and suspicious. Travis chewing gum like the whole thing bored him. Mom trailed behind them, clutching her purse like it might float her through the room. Their eyes scanned the space, then landed on me. For a moment no one spoke. I rose to greet them. "Good morning," I said, voice even. "Please have a seat," Dad blinked. I'm the one leading today's presentation," I said. "Let's get started." They sat, all of them, just like they used to at our old kitchen table. Only now I held the agenda. I held the numbers, I held the future, I clicked the remote. The screen lit up. Page after page of financial breakdowns, improvement plans, staffing structures, and crop strategy. I walked them through it all. Calm, efficient, unapologetic. When I finished, I folded my hands and said, "This is your second chance, don't waste it." Silence, long, heavy, uncomfortable. Dad opened his mouth, closed it. Even Kyle didn't have a snarky comment ready. Travis just looked down at his folder like maybe the pages would start making sense if he stared hard enough. Then Mom, quiet, fragile Mom, whispered something I could barely hear. "You really did it." And in her eyes, I saw something unfamiliar. Not pride, not guilt, wonder. I didn't walk out of that room with cheers or applause. I didn't need to. I walked out knowing I had reclaimed the land that once rejected me, on my terms, in my voice, through my expertise. They didn't clap when I graduated. But now they were listening. And this time I was the one deciding what came next. They didn't speak right away. After I finished the presentation, the air in the room felt strange. Not heavy, exactly. More like the pause after a clap of thunder, the part where you wonder what's been broken. Kyle leaned back first. His jaw was tight, arms folded across his chest like he might ward off the truth by sheer posture. Travis stared at the screen, lips pressed together, his cocky edge nowhere to be found. And my father, he was looking straight at me. His eyes weren't hard anymore. They weren't dismissive or proud or even confused. They were wet. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. That, I thought, was a first. He cleared his throat as if hoping to find some version of himself he could still use, some version that didn't have to admit what we both knew. "You were never weak," he finally said. "We just didn't see you." It hit me like a slow-moving train. I had imagined that sentence 100 different ways. In dreams, in angry shower monologues, in silent car rides where I rewrote my past with better dialogue. But nothing prepared me for how ordinary it sounded, like an overdue library book finally returned. Kyle shifted in his seat. "You really gonna run things now?" he asked, not with mockery, but with something like quiet disbelief. I met his eyes. "I already am." He gave a slight nod, just once, not dramatic, but real. Travis, always the last to show his cards, closed his folder and said, "So what, you're the boss?" "No," I said. "I'm the one fixing what you broke." He didn't argue. My mother finally spoke. "I saw your name in the letter," she said softly. "I knew I didn't tell them." That surprised me, but not as much as the tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't stand up for you, I should have." Her hands trembled on her lap. "I thought if I stayed quiet, I wouldn't make things worse." "You didn't make it better," I said, not unkindly, just honestly. She nodded, lips quivering. "I know." And that was the moment it hit me, not just emotionally, but physically. I didn't need their approval anymore. I wasn't that girl in the strawberry field waiting to be picked for something other than shame. I had picked myself. The silence held for a few seconds longer, then Dad stood slowly. "Thank you," he said, not as a father, as a man whose business had been spared. "You're welcome," I replied. He glanced around the table. "We'll do better, we'll follow your lead." I didn't respond, not because I didn't believe him, but because I'd stopped needing promises from people who only made them in desperation. What I wanted now was action, compliance, results. I gathered my materials, stood, and walked to the door. Then I paused and turned back. "This isn't about forgiveness," I said. "It's about accountability." They nodded. No arguments, no protests. I walked out without looking back. Outside the glass-walled boardroom, my heels echoed against polished concrete floors. Sunlight poured in through tall windows, washing everything in a soft golden haze. It was morning in Sacramento, and it was morning in me. A new one. That evening, I sat on my balcony, nursing a cup of tea instead of celebration champagne. My phone buzzed once, an email from Allison confirming the Hart Farm integration had officially begun. All paperwork was filed. Transition support would start Monday. I sipped slowly, feeling the heat on my palms. Not from the tea. From the fire I'd carried all those years. Not anger anymore. Clarity, power, peace. It's funny, after all that build-up, the big moments didn't feel big. The new management structure was rolled out by the end of the month. Contracts were signed, consultant teams dispatched, and digital systems installed to track everything from soil acidity to shipment schedules. The family farm, my childhood prison, was officially under my watch. But the day the final document came through, I didn't cry. I didn't pop champagne or collapse into some cinematic heap of catharsis. I sat at my desk, reviewed the numbers one last time, and quietly whispered, "You did it, Eliza." No one clapped. But this time, I didn't need them to. The first few weeks were tense. Kyle refused to speak directly to the consultants. Travis argued with the field techs about automation. Dad hovered awkwardly during meetings, unsure where to stand when he wasn't the center anymore. But they learned, slowly, because now they had no choice. We weren't equals. I was their superior. They were still family, but this wasn't a reunion. It was a reset. Mom sent me a letter. Handwritten, folded neatly in a floral card I'm sure she'd been saving for years. It read, "I don't know how to say sorry in a way that erases anything. I just know I was wrong. And I hope one day you'll let me sit beside you, not as your mother, but as a woman who's still learning how to love her daughter right." I read it once, then again, and I cried, not because I needed her apology to move forward, but because for the first time she offered something without asking for anything back. I didn't move home. People asked, my firm friends, even Nina once during a late-night call. But the answer was always no. Sacramento was mine. The farm was my history. The city was my future. Still, I visited, quarterly trips, structured check-ins. Each time the fields looked different, not in shape but in tone, more organized, less chaotic. The soil tested and nourished, not just pushed to its limits. It felt for the first time like land that could forgive, even if its people still had to learn how. One evening, a young field manager named Jordan, new hire, early 20s, whip-smart, asked me while walking the western lot, "Is it weird working where you grew up?" I smiled, only when I remember how much I was told I didn't belong here. He looked confused. "You not belong?" "I wasn't the strong one," I said. He stared at me. "Well, you are now." It was the simplest compliment, but it landed like none before it. At the next quarterly review, Dad pulled me aside. He didn't say much, just handed me a weathered pocket knife with my initials etched on the handle. I remembered it from when I was a kid. I'd carved them in at age 10, only to have Kyle take it from me the next day, laughing that I'd never need a real tool anyway. I thought it had been lost, but here it was in my father's hand. "Found it," he said. "Figured it was yours now." It was never not mine, but I took it gently. "Thanks," I said. That was enough. Some stories end with a bang. Mine didn't. It ended with spreadsheets, leadership plans, and a girl who used to cry in tool sheds now standing at the front of a room full of grown men, her family, and saying, "This is how we move forward." Not with revenge, with rules, with respect, with results. 10 years later, I stood on a stage I never expected to reach. The auditorium buzzed with quiet energy, folding chairs filled with young professionals, professors, foundation leaders, and rural students who had traveled hours to attend the Agri-Finance Futures Conference. The lights were warm, not harsh, the kind that made every face in the crowd glow a little softer. My face was on the banner hanging over the podium. Keynote speaker, Eliza Hart, senior partner, Luminvest Capital. I still hadn't gotten used to that. Not the title, though senior partner had a nice ring to it, but the fact that people now listened. Not because I raised my hand loudest, but because I'd earned the right to hold the mic. I looked down at my notes, then folded them closed. I didn't need them. "I grew up on a strawberry farm," I began, steady and slow. "We weren't rich, we weren't even stable, but we worked hard, or I should say the boys worked hard. I was just the girl who packed lunches and washed the mud off boots." There were a few chuckles, kind ones. I was told I was too soft, too slow, that I didn't belong in the field. A pause. But what they didn't know, what most people still don't see, is that managing a farm takes more than strong arms. It takes strong minds. Nods rippled across the crowd. I started calculating harvest output and loss ratios before I even knew what those words meant. I just knew the kitchen didn't stretch far enough unless I figured out where to cut. I learned finance by necessity, survival math, quiet strategy. Another pause, deeper this time. And when I left home, I left not just to prove them wrong, but to prove myself right. That landed. The silence in the room was a listening one. I glanced to the side, to the wings where the event staff stood. And that's when I saw her, my mother, front row, third seat in. Hair now streaked with gray, a soft scarf around her shoulders, hands folded neatly in her lap. I didn't know she was coming. She hadn't written, hadn't called, but there she was, tears in her eyes, not the wounded kind, the witnessing kind. I turned back to the crowd. Some of you come from places where you're the only one dreaming. Maybe you're the only girl who wants to be more than a farmer's wife. Maybe you're the only one in your family who even knows what a balance sheet is. Laughter, gentle, affirming. I'm here to tell you being the only one doesn't mean you're wrong. Beat. It means you're early. A few audience members were already tearing up. I took a breath, then finished. Sometimes the weakest child in the field is the strongest in the storm. The room erupted. Not in polite applause, but in something thunderous. Raw, I blinked fast, trying not to cry. But when I looked back toward my mother, she was standing, clapping, hands trembling, tears streaming down her face. And for the first time in my life, she didn't look away. She saw me, truly saw me. And I nodded just once. Not because I needed her approval, but because she was finally offering it. After the speech, students swarmed the stage. Some asked about internships, others just wanted to hug me. One girl whispered, "They told me I was dreaming too big." I smiled at her. "They told me I was dreaming at all. Look where we are now." That night, alone in my hotel room, I stood by the window, watching the city hum with its quiet electricity. I thought of the girl I used to be, the girl in the field, the girl in the shed, the girl with the voicemails and empty chairs at her graduation. And I realized something, none of that defined me anymore. What defined me was this: I turned silence into strategy, pain into purpose, and dismissal into legacy. If you've ever fought for a future no one believed in but you, this story is yours too. Eliza Hart isn't just a name, she's a promise. That quiet girls don't stay quiet forever. That the ones they laugh at, they learn to lead. Drop a comment if Eliza's journey felt like your own. Like this video if you believe strength isn't always loud, but it is real. And share this with someone who needs to remember they don't have to be seen to start building. They just have to start. Thanks for walking this journey with Eliza. She walked it alone once, but not anymore.